Good evening. This is the Composite. I am your host, Deanne Battle, and this is what's shaping up to be an early evening talk show starring me. And if you hear the breathing, it's my dog. She knows I'm doing something that doesn't involve her, so then she shows up. All right. And this is, I believe, episode 15. So I'm excited because I've managed to keep the project going for that long to make it to 15 episodes. And I'm also excited for what might be on the horizon. So if anyone joins me live, welcome. For anyone that's watching the playback, welcome as well. A few people have told me they've gone back and watched a few episodes. And those in addition to, Instagram, watching the playback there, I also have a channel on YouTube, so you can check me out over there. I'm not sure how long I'm going to be on this evening. I've got a few things that I'm mulling over, thinking about, culturally, politically, socially. But as I've said, multiple episodes, I don't like to do like hot takes and just be like, oh, I heard something and I haven't done any reading. I haven't really thought about it. And then here's just, my kind of cockeyed, take on it. And, I know a lot of people build followings that way, build, channels and online personas that way, but that's just not how I roll. I don't ever think like necessarily my first thought about something is the most cogent or the most beneficial for humanity. So I don't know. Or maybe I just take this particular format a little too seriously, but yeah, that's how I'm feeling about it. So because of that, so I have a couple of things that I'm thinking about. Like, give you a perfect example, right? So I'm teaching in a summer program for those that don't know. And one of my students asked me today, oh, hey, Miss Battle, did you know that Lizzo got canceled? And I was just like, what? And he was trying to give me some details. And then, I overheard a podcast on my way home in the car saying that she was accused of harassment by some of her dancers, just, by things they were forced to say and do and things of that nature. Again, I only know a little bit about it. Now, I'm sure that there are, my hair is shedding. So I know there are people that will make like hours of content based on like that initial headline. But, for me, I'm like mulling it over because it's just, in one aspect, like, in an era of Me Too where there's supposed to be more thoughtful conversations and more accountability around consent. And this is, you see that little snout there. Okay. More responsible conversations around, accountability and consent and things of that nature. And so, if the lawsuit exists in the spirit of that, then it should be a good thing, right? But then I remember back, like as my student was talking, he was saying, oh, well, she's being canceled because she was body shaming her dancers and she always talks about body positivity. So she's a hypocrite. And as he was talking, it just struck me. I was just like, if I think back to when I was that age, so like, let's say between like 12 or 13 and like 15 or in 16, I'm like, who did I really look to, musicians and athletes and rappers, dancers, whoever, did I look to them for any type of moral authority? I'm not saying that I didn't. I can't remember if that was the case. Because I was thinking like to myself, who was Lizzo for me at that time? that I was that age, and would did I expect that person to like have some type of like cohesive moral decency at their core, and then if I found out they didn't, then they're canceled. I mean, I think it's a different thing when we're thinking about like any type of slurs, or in denigrating language, things of that nature. Now, again, I haven't done any, studied reading of this topic, but just to hear the way that young people were talking about it today, just like, oh, I found out a potentially bad thing about somebody and now they're canceled. And it was just that simple, the way that he was saying it. And, I just wonder if if it's untrue, right, then it's showing that, wow, rumors and allegations and stuff like that do such powerful damage, even when there's no merit, which, we're aware of. But, to see it happen to, a different intersection of identities is interesting. I'm sorry, just a second. Hi, sweetie. There's a puppy that is outside and it's whining periodically, and she's been whining back at him, her, in response. And, she's been outside, so I don't want anybody to think she hasn't been out, but she wants more friendship and stuff like that. And the complex where I'm living, it's not exactly the complex where you can like make dog friends quite easily. It's actually been quite hard. So I feel badly for her a bit, but hence the whining. But yes, and I'll wrap up with this Lizzo story in a second, but just, thinking about, again, is there a level of moral responsibility that she has to her fans or to her audience in general? Because if it's untrue, then it's like, wow, social media and the 24-hour news cycle can do so much damage, based on something that's not even true. That's something that's really harmful. But, if it is true, what does that mean, in terms of thinking about her canon of music, the other artists that she's maybe worked with or written for or collaborated with, as a feature and things like that. So, and I know it's a continuing conversation, but I wonder on the younger end of the spectrum, like if this conversation is that complicated, or maybe it just seems more of a challenge to me. Because I overheard, the same student was saying like how, he should be able to play R. Kelly and he still like listens to R. Kelly or whatever. And, I was talking to another teacher about it and we were just like, yeah, this conversation keeps going on. Excuse me. Can you separate the art and the artist? And I wonder if maybe it's just this particular moment where it's, increasingly challenging, or the implications of that maybe are a bit different, just because so much of who an artist is on display, right? Like, when Yeats was writing poems and stuff like that, like, he didn't have to worry about like, oh, is he, what he's posting on social media, is he responding to fans in his DMs, or like, is he doing a format like this, is he doing a video, is he talking to an audience, like so many of the artists who are seen as like a Steinbeck or someone else who seems like particularly solitary in their work, but there's just so much more of yourself, I think, that you're required to give as an artist, right? So again, thinking back to my like preteen years, I was like, oh, like who was my Lizzo? I don't know if I had one, because whoever I was listening to, who was really popular then, like, I just keep thinking Aaliyah, and Destiny's Child, or City High. I'm thinking of like groups like these, or though they might have been a bit later. But it's like I didn't have that much access, right? I didn't necessarily know that much about those groups or those artists to feel like I could make a full assessment of someone's character, which, I mean, it even thinking that is, or assuming that, is presumptuous, because you could follow someone for 3 years on Instagram, right, and they're still just giving you curated slices of who they are. Like, you're not getting the unsanitized version of themselves. Like, so it's like if somebody takes their wig off, or takes their makeup off, or shows you something unflattering, or something that they think is unflattering about themselves, that's still there's a degree of choice in that, right? And especially thinking about like Lizzo as an entity. I mean, some of her music is catchy. I'm not a big fan, just because like I think it's just the actual way that she sings. Her voice doesn't appeal to me. I think she's wildly talented though. But one thing that I do know about her is that she's seen as somebody who speaks up for marginalized people, for people that are being bullied, very similar to Lady Gaga. And so I'm just wondering, now that fans and people know about her, does that about her? Does that put like an undue burden on her as an artist and a public figure to adhere, right, to this sort of squeaky clean persona to a certain degree? Like, I wonder if she was an artist with a different like brand setup in terms of like political and social leanings, if it would be like, oh, I heard this thing and it might be really terrible, it might be true, it might not, oh, she's canceled, right? So that exists on one side here, and then on the other side, I was just briefly going to touch on the Carly Russell situation. And so, long story short, for anybody that hasn't, excuse me, goodness, sorry, allergies, terrible. All right. So for anyone that has not, kept up with the situation, Carly Russell's a young woman, Black woman, I believe in her late 20s, was attending nursing school, and she called her family frantic, and she said, she saw a baby on the side of the highway, and that she was trying to get help for the baby. And then her mom or someone said that they heard her scream, and then they, came upon her phone and her wig, the whole thing just seems a little far-fetched and wild. Not because I couldn't imagine someone getting kidnapped. It's just the baby thing was kind of like, oh, okay. The baby thing was a little weird. And I don't know how to express why. It's just like, I'm thinking about me as a Black woman. It's like, okay, as a Black woman, you see just like a random baby on the highway, and it's like, I could see myself like with the doors locked, like maybe pulling up a mile or two ahead. I know this sounds bad, but like, and then calling the police being like, hey, 2 miles back, there's a fucking baby, like, in a diaper on the side of the road. Can y'all, handle that, work that out? But I don't see me as just an independent of sound mind, embodied human being opening up my car door in the middle of the night, like, hey, there's a damn baby on the side of the road. Like, what's going on? I don't see me doing that. So that's why that shit threw me off. But, people were posting on social media. They were like, pray for this sister. Like, that she comes back alive. Her family's struggling. Her parents are distraught or whatever. And so, again, I don't do hot takes, right? So I'm not going to get on there and be like, Carly is to roadside baby as Jussie is to Subway meatball sandwich at 4 a.m. So, just random thoughts that come through your head, but not necessarily something that you want to vocalize, right? And so it turns out that, unfortunately, that was a hoax. And I say unfortunately because you still want to, even though many of us are more than weary with the carceral state, and the extrajudicial violence and killing that many of us live in fear from every day, from any type of law enforcement, right? So you have that on one side. But that doesn't mean that you dick them around and waste their time, right? And so there might have been several other people that were actually legitimately missing, but because of, squandering of resources, they were looking for Miss Russell and not looking for the person that actually was missing. So I just want to take a second to acknowledge that. So that is unfortunate. And then another thing that's unfortunate is the ways in which it's become, a conversation about respectability politics. Some people are like, well, now that she did this, people are not going to believe, the Black women who are actually missing, who actually do need help. And yes, I would agree with some of the sentiments that I see that are like, okay, well, it's not, Carly Russell cannot hold the weight of every single Black woman that has gone missing or has maybe fabricated being missing. And, that's not fair. It's an undue burden. I see that on one side. But I also want to push back against that a bit, because when people say, it's irresponsible to say, okay, as one Black person, why should you have to shoulder the burden of what people think of all Black people in the Americas, across the world, so on and so forth. And I see that. But I'm at a certain point in my life where I'm like, we are a singular people, right? I believe singular in our suffering, but also singular in our gifts and our generosity of what we give to the planet. And so with that being said, if you center, individuality. Like, I'm just do whatever the fuck I want. Like, I don't ever have to think about who's come before me and who's come after me. If you center individuality to that high degree, then what makes us any different, right, from the cultures and the power structures that denigrate our history, our contributions? You know, I'm just thinking about the United States specifically in general, but not, exclusive to that. If we want to see true change in terms of what this country has meant, but what this country still has yet to realize in terms of our ideals, then I would argue that a hyper individuality is problematic at best, right? So does that mean that, you shame Carly Russell for the rest of her life because she screwed it up for all black women? No. That is, categorically unfair. But does that mean that I don't, if I'm Carly Russell, right? So if I'm looking at it from the other perspective, does that mean that I'm not, the way that I'm moving in this moment, choices that I'm making, how might that ripple out, right? And here's why I phrase it that way, because I think, one, I guess you say, stripe of the respectability politics conversation is extremely limiting, meaning like every little thing I do, I have to center black people and the black experience before I make a move. No, that's paralyzing. And again, categorically unfair. But that does not mean that as a black person, I can't take a beat, right? Take a second or two and think about certain implications before I make a decision, right? Just take a pause, right? Because you might pause and make the same exact decision, but when people have a particular reaction, you're ready. You're like, oh yeah, I thought for a second, like, hey, I'm making up a janky story about a baby on the side of the road here. How might that affect black women, right? And just have a moment. Because if you have that moment, right, again, you've had that moment, you made the same exact decision, people can tell, right, by the way you respond. There's a certain, I think, indignation that shows itself on someone's face when they have not considered their identities in terms of how somebody responds to something. Let me think of an example. This is not a great example, but Lori Lightfoot, right? She lost her run for re-election as the mayor of Chicago. And they continually asked her, well, what do you think, the role of your race and gender played in this race, meaning, the race for re-election. And I don't agree with her response, But in her body language, you knew very clearly she was ready, right, for that question. She knew it was going to go there. That, I think, is very different from, Meghan Markle, right? I'm not going to pick on her, but those few clips that I saw from she and her husband's documentary. Now, either she's just an amazing actress, but in her body language and in her voice, to hear her say, like, she hadn't, I'm paraphrasing, but she hadn't really considered the role of race really in her identity until she came to the UK. And I was just like, wow, okay. Again, maybe she's being disingenuous, but, in the body language, right, and in her voice, it felt authentic, right? And so I just wonder, if they ever do Carly Russell interviews, like, what is her body language? What would her voice tell us? Would it be like, oh, I honestly felt that one of the most vulnerable populations in this country, I really thought as a member of that particular group that people would have the same response as someone from the dominant culture in society, faking or staging a kidnapping. I really thought the response was going to be the same. I would be interested to see what her body language says about that, So again, I think, and then I'll move on. But one, I guess, framework of respectability politics, right, is, I'm chained or constrained by making sure every word or every decision that I'm engaged in has an uplifting effect on my racial group, right, or my ethnic group. So that's one category. But then the other, like I said, is just that, just take a beat and then make a decision, right? Because for me, the distinction is I don't need someone to do me proud as a Black person. But it's nice to know, again, you had that moment, you had a thought before you made a choice, right? Because what would it say about us, right, as a singular people, if those choices or decisions are not being made, right? Or if it doesn't feel as if it's being made. Because then I think the narrative is we are hyper individualistic and we don't give a damn about each other, right? So, but if we don't give a damn about each other, then why would anyone else? So it might be a difference without a distinction. But I see the Carly Russell thing a little bit differently. I mean, I hope whatever issue or issues that she was having where she felt like that was like a necessary course of action, I hope she works that out, right? Because it just doesn't bode well, I think, for any of the relationships in your life if you feel like I gotta pretend to peace out because nobody cares, right? Or there's that level of desperation that she felt like she had to do that. Not as a justification. I mean, whatever legal actions they take, I think that's necessary as well. But for me, it's just like a really weird way that people talk about this stuff, right? Like, I just don't think it's right to tell my community, protect black women, but can't nobody say anything about how a black woman acts. It's just kind of like, I don't think that's how community works, right? I think there's a way in which you hold each other, right? In a way where you are present, positive, but also real with one another, right? Like, nah, sis, like lying about being kidnapped or whatever it was that happened, that's not cool, right? But she doesn't have to get like, I feel like she's gotten like so roasted. I mean, the memes alone are like off the hook. And that is also a part of it, right? So when I say hold each other, when you hold someone, right, like if you just like have them in a light hug, there is a part of that might feel a bit restraining, right? Because you can't lift your arms. But then there's that intimacy, right? That yes, this person's being present with you, heart to heart, right? You're sharing space, you're sharing breath, right? And they're just holding you, right? And I don't know what changed in the Black community. I just don't feel like we hold each other anymore. I felt held, right, in my community growing up, and it might have been somewhat restraining, right? Because I knew like, oh, I can't be on the corner doing whatever, right? Because somebody will tell my mom and my dad and, my grandmas and just like everybody. So, but I also knew like, just as I can't hang out on the corner, right, because someone's going to, tell somebody in my family or something like that. I also am not going to get snatched off the corner, right, because there are people that give a damn, right? And when you give a damn about something, sometimes you critique it, right? But we can do that in love. We can say, Carly, in love, what you did was real fucked up, sweetie. Right? So we're going to get you the help you need, but we just need to pause and time out and say, lying about like being kidnapped and stuff, that's not the look, right, that we're going for. And I think that can be a loving process. I don't think it has to be a cancellation. I don't think it has to be something you can't get out from under. I mean, so there are certain things like, right, like people who are murderers or pedophiles, right? That's going to be in its own category. Yes, there are things that you, quote, can't come back from. But the other stuff, the missteps, or the, you put your foot in your mouth, or you know what I mean, or you got busted being hypocritical, lying, or whatever, I think you can come back from that. But here's the thing. It's like, are you going to be self-righteous about it? Or are you going to have a level of humility to say, yeah, like, I'm going to be humble and say I'm taking that L on this one because of the way I went about it. Right? I think if you can come to the community and say, I messed up, I made a mistake, and I want to be welcomed back into the fold. I want to be held, right? So that's the other side of it. Black people, in my opinion, right, we need to do a better job of holding one another, but we also have to want to be held. Right? So what would it be like for Carly to say, I did this thing, right, because I felt isolated, because I felt desperate. I need to be held. Can you all hold me? And would we honor that request and hold her? So I hadn't really intended to talk about any of that, but it was just on my mind about the situation. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I didn't get a laugh out of it. Like, there was one meme where it was like, it says, I ask boss, can I take PTO? Boss says no. And then it's like me. And then there was a picture of Carly Russell, right? Because she was, gone for 2 days. Yeah, that shit was funny, right? But I can laugh at the situation without being like, oh, she's trash. Like, it just immediately devolves to that. And then it's like, well, if everybody's trash, if we're all garbage, what is the point of any of this? There has to be a better way. And I mean, especially since I work with young people, it's like, a lot of them, they don't have conflict resolution skills. It's just like, you either on my team or you off, and there's no negotiation. I mean, maybe it is one of the perils of youth. I don't know, possibly. But I'm about to die. Oh, sorry about that if it paused. My phone is about to die soon. Yeah, the lack of conflict resolution skills, or just like the lack of just the idea, like, I can be a completely aware human being and mindful and respectful of others, and I'm still gonna fuck up because I'm a human being. And there's no space for that. And I think everyone needs to make space for that, but especially as a Black woman, I would want us to be more kind to one another, right? Especially with all we're dealing with, right? Like, put that Band-Aid on. Hold each other, all right? I'm going to be back on. Most likely not tomorrow because I have some errands to run after work. But if not, on Thursday, August 3rd, then definitely Friday, August 4th, I will be back. I want to meet my twice a week requirement. And anytime I go a little bit of time without doing the show, it feels a bit weird now. So I'm getting into more of a habit with it. Okay. So that was The Composite, episode 15, I believe. And thank you for joining me, most likely on the replay. All right. Take care.